The story begins when Arya, who heads security for the Crown Prince of the Empire, comes to his office and, as usual, never ceases to amaze. In this one, he throws paper airplanes all over the office. The girl constantly tries to hint that he, as a prince, should do something more useful than childish games, or at least, not throwing airplanes in the office because at any moment, someone could come in. Julius answers the same thing every time, namely that he has no business at all. The only thing he can do is think of how to fulfill his father's request. Arya thinks there are only two explanations for this. Either the Empire really has no problems to solve, or he's just lazy and makes up an excuse, supposedly looking for a bride candidate. To make the girl ask fewer questions, the prince hinted that he doesn't have to report to her, and at least she has more work to do, and he doesn't see her doing anything during her working hours. Actually, she just doesn't like the fact that when she plans to work and wants to be productive, his behavior is highly distracting. She has to work in that atmosphere, and it's not surprising at all that the girl doesn't like something about it. But if she saw that the prince was constantly busy, motivated, and inspired to work for the benefit of the Empire, the work would be much easier and more pleasant. At least, she would not have to postpone to another day what she does not have time for today because of him. Arya no longer knows how to explain that in such an environment, one doesn't want to do even the easy things, and in this situation, it's her boss's fault directly. This time, the girl didn't hold back and said she could do a little experiment. If she saw that he was finally taking care of his duties, her productivity might increase several times over. As suddenly, the guy decided to abruptly change the subject and started talking about the upcoming choice of a princess candidate. He wondered if Arya had looked at the list of... The girl replied that she didn't have time for it, because unlike some people, she was busy with something during her working hours. Quite by accident, the assistant noticed an airplane coming in with a picture of some girl and thought it might be a page from that list. She caught this sheet. It had information about one of the bride candidates. At that moment, the girl realized that all these airplanes, these are the lists of candidates. She began to resent it because how could you make airplanes out of them without making sure there was nothing important on the papers? And that's not all. At some point, the guy found out that it was all those lists, and at that very second decided to throw them into the fireplace, as if he decided to piss off the assistant and did it on purpose. Arya had no patience left. She started yelling very loudly and said that at this rate, he would never find a bride, although from the looks of it, it wasn't that important to him. It became unbearable for her to look at all those lists being destroyed in a fiery blaze with every passing second. This time, she did not forgive him for such behavior, and let it be none of her business. The girl told everything to the Emperor. Just half an hour later, the man called his son for an important conversation. The Emperor is grateful to the girl for telling him about the situation, and it seems that something interesting is starting to happen. The Emperor will either get really angry or stop helping his son with his personal life. He started to remind him about his age and the reaction of girls who would find out that he had just thrown away their applications and wanted to burn them. But Julius didn't seem to be interested in that at all. He was waiting for the moment when the conversation was over and he could leave for lunch. Afterward, the Emperor turned to his son's assistant and thanked her for having rescued from the fire the questionnaire of a remarkable girl, for if it had not been for her act, they would never have known who dreamed of marrying his son. As suddenly, the man suddenly ordered the prince to meet the girl immediately. He explained that it was his own fault that he had only one option left, since all the others he had simply burned down. After this, the man could not help himself and began to cry. He began to have a strong panic, as he has long dreamed of grandchildren and does not know whether he will even be able to live to this moment, because at this rate, no grandchildren he will not see. The prince didn't feel any regret. On the contrary, he wanted to leave as soon as possible. He turned away and said, "This is why he doesn't like to talk to his father. They never had any other topics but children and the bride." The guy walked over to the assistant, put his arm around her, and asked her to go somewhere with him. He doesn't want to stay and watch this senseless tantrum by his father. Arya felt very uncomfortable. She felt very sorry for the man, because his son just doesn't realize how important it is for him to see his grandchildren as soon as possible and relax, knowing that Julius already has a family, and that he's fine with that. The emperor had said more than once that he would not forgive himself if he died before his son's wedding ceremony came, and ideally, he wanted to see a young child, or even two. Julius doesn't even hide how much he doesn't care about it. He asks to leave together a calm environment and for her to protect him from this dull reality. The girl replied that it's his duty and asked that he doesn't even think to involve her in it. How suddenly, out of desperation, the guy asked if he could please everyone and solve the problem if he married the first person he met. Arya replied that it was probably the fastest way and advised him to do it as soon as possible. Julius did not expect such an answer, because he was sure that his assistant would advise him to find a sincere love and get married for real. In fact, she is so tired of these conversations that she does not care who will be his future bride. The main thing that the emperor should be happy and live to see his grandchildren, and of course, that it does not affect her work in any way. Of course, the lad was very excited, for he had received ostensibly a license for any girl, except that, judging by the look in his eyes, he instantly had some idea of. At this point, Arya doesn't even realize that by saying it's a good idea to marry the first girl she meets, she's done something she might regret. Though maybe she'll be glad she did. The prince turned around and came to his father again. He told him that he was going to get married, but he didn't explain who and how he had found a bride so quickly. The emperor didn't even want to hear the details. He was very happy and said that he would take care of the ceremony. Julius began to marvel at his genius, for he had figured out how to solve two problems: appease his father and marry at an age when it was customary to do so. No words will suffice to describe the emperor's joy. He only heard the word marry, that he did not even ask any questions. He had many plans and ideas for the ceremony, and whispered something in his father's ear. And it seems that he did it for a reason. I suspect that at that moment he said the name of his future wife. Meanwhile, Arya looks at all of this and has no idea what's really going on. Long story short, she's in for a lot of surprises. After a little thought, the emperor did not stall for time and ordered his aides to bring the documents. Julius does not stop smiling and looking forward to the moment when someone will know that he chose her as his wife. Just a few hours later, the emperor arranged a small meeting to discuss some details. A very large number of people gathered like never before. It became very noisy. Everyone is curious to know the name of the bride, and of course the date of the ceremony. This morning no one even guessed that such an event would soon take place, and that the prince would announce such news. It turns out, according to the rules, the emperor cannot just approve or disapprove the candidate. For this he has special assistants, whose opinion, we can say, even more important than the imperial. If they are against it, he cannot arrange the ceremony, such rules. The helpers thought for a very long time about the name of the future bride. At first they were against it. Then they started to look for positive aspects, and in the end, there were fewer negative ones left. In the end, all unanimously approved the engagement without a single doubt. Such a thing happens very rarely, but fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, the prince was authorized to marry. Unlike how it usually is, these people began to get excited about the upcoming event as if it were their own wedding. They began to look forward to the day, eagerly anticipating how things would be. A few hours later, people found out about this decision, and even the name of the bride. Arya came out after resting from her room and noticed that there were a lot of people in the corridor, and they were all happily discussing something. The girl decided to go over and find out what happened. It had been a long time since she had seen so many people near the news sign. Arya herself had never gone near that wall. But now, she suddenly felt like going over there. And from this moment begins the most interesting. She went to the wall and thought that she just imagined, or she may not have slept well. The girl saw her picture and could not believe her eyes, because next to her, placed a picture of the prince. Strangely, she didn't immediately realize what it was, and as soon as she started reading the announcement, she was speechless. It said that the imperial family and the central council officially recognized the engagement of the following individuals: Prince Julius and Arya, the head of the security service. Julius decided to marry her the moment they talked about the first woman they met. The girl doesn't understand how it can be, because when she talked about it, she couldn't even imagine how it would turn out. She has had so many thoughts, both bad and good. She doesn't understand how to react to this and what to do, and also how to look into the prince's eyes. He never even had a thought of considering him as a husband. She's just starting to realize everything that's going on, and more people are starting to converge. But that's not the most awkward thing that could happen at this point. All the fun starts right now. Arya stands by the wall and realizes that since the prince's second-in-command is coming, he'll be here soon, at which point she wants to fall through the ground and pretend she didn't see anything. But it didn't end there. Even though people reacted well and even started to rejoice, she felt uncomfortable. She started to receive 1,000,000 congratulations. There was a loud noise, and thus, people attracted the prince's attention even more. The girl realizes that at any second, he will definitely come up and say something to her. In fact, if it was at least a sincere desire to get married, everything would not be so bad. But since she is only the first encounter, it is difficult to understand whether to rejoice or, on the contrary, to hate the gentleman, because it's nothing but humiliation. She's only happy about one thing. Everyone else thinks they're in true love and the wedding will happen for real. No one knows their secret, and all those smiles are surprisingly genuine. And of course, as expected, just a few minutes later appears her so-called beloved groom. That's how he began to call all present. They are very interested to look at the newlyweds and hear some words from the prince. They see this situation so that before these two hid their feelings, and now told about it to the whole staff. The girl realizes that she needs to be guided by these legends, but at the same time she has a feeling that it's all very wrong. It's not how she manifested her first relationship, especially not with this person. The only thing left for her in this situation is to just keep quiet and make it seem like it's not news to her. Arya can barely contain herself from making a scandal and retreating to her room. It's very hard for her to stand there and accept congratulations. Some of them even started crying. It was as if they had known for a long time that these two would be together. Except that, unlike the others, the girl had never even thought about it. One of the knights admitted that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The commander who had brought him to this job, in his opinion, was the perfect bride for the prince, and better than her, he simply would not find anyone else. At this point, the girl couldn't help herself and asked everyone to calm down. She was fed up with the noise and the awkward feeling that she was deceiving someone, although in fact, it was not her who should be ashamed, but the one who had arranged it all. She, like everyone else, is very interested to hear the groom, for surely he has already prepared some speech and knows how to explain everything. No one is going to leave, and especially not to let her leave. As soon as the prince appears, everyone instantly calms down and waits for his words. Unlike Arya, he is in a great mood and does not understand how one can be angry at such a thing. Besides, everyone dreams of becoming his bride. It was the moment she had been waiting for, and at the same time greatly dreading. But unfortunately, this conversation could not be avoided. She wondered what he would say and how the meeting would end. And that's not all. Before the prince approached her, one of the knights appeared out of nowhere. He ventured to say that they were perfect for each other. The commander couldn't help herself and hit him back. But, after all, he was not guilty of anything. And on the contrary, wanted to congratulate from his side. In these words, there was nothing offensive. No one understood what had just happened. In addition, the blow was really not weak. The others were very much startled, and at the same second, stopped smiling, especially stopped saying any congratulatory words, or at least anything that looked like it. There was an awkward pause, for the situation was really no less strange than the news of the engagement. Right after that, the second knight came up. He turned out to be very brave and said the same thing. Wished happy married life and strong love, of course. The reaction was exactly the same. The commander punished him as well. which means she's not going to pretend that they're really in love. She started demanding the truth and hinted that things aren't at all what they look like at first glance. Colleagues began to help each other. They approached both the first and the second to at least see if everything was all right. They called the doctor and looked at the commander apprehensively. At this point, she felt very ashamed. She herself didn't realize how it happened and started apologizing. She even said that she didn't hit that hard to feel sorry for anyone. In response, her assistants and asked that next time, the girl controlled herself because people began to congratulate her. And she begins to beat not guilty knights, even without explaining anything. Everyone simultaneously started to defend the two knights, because this is not normal. Even apologies will not help her now. The aides hinted that after this, she will have to try very hard to regain her reputation and get the same respect as she had just 15 minutes ago. Already everyone's smile was gone, and there was a sense of injustice, because at the very least, if she wasn't their commander, they would have answered, and his answer long ago, and defended themselves for their colleague. She just can't admit that she's wrong, and she's allowed herself too much just because of her status and rank. After she had no desire to stay there, Arya immediately left and started heading to her room. She would be much more comfortable there. Along the way, the girl began to resent him and noticed that the prince had been treating her better than a mere assistant for a long time. Though perhaps it just seemed to her, and he just had that way with girls. No wonder that even now she couldn't walk calmly to her room, and even here he found her. The guy just said her name and asked her to stop as she immediately froze and almost passed out. At the same time, she's not in the mood. Arya doesn't hide the fact that it's not the best moment to discuss the latest news. But as usual, Julius doesn't stop it. From that moment on, he started hugging her more often and pretending that they were really lovers. But I wonder if it was sincere or just to make it look believable. The girl tries to calm herself down and not do the same thing to one of her knights. But at some point, she can't take it anymore. The assistant turned around and said she was fed up with it. She didn't understand. Did the prince think he had the right to make her his wife without asking or consulting her? Julius had never seen her this angry before. But now, she had every right to be. At the very least, he should explain everything and make everyone happy. Instead, he's having a lot more fun now that she has a different expression and isn't afraid to say what she thinks. To make it clear to him, Arya showed him the news she'd seen on the wall today and warned him that if he didn't explain anything, she wouldn't be talking to him. She has such a sinister look in her eyes that it seems she doesn't care at all right now that he's her master, and she's just an assistant who can't accuse him of anything. She doesn't care about rank now, because it's about a wedding she wasn't told about. Arya said that even for a regular joke, it's too much. People got it wrong, and he'll have to explain it all. The principal responded by saying that everyone got it right. He drew her attention to the stamp at the bottom of the sheet, and told her that his father had officially approved the document. The girl wouldn't believe it and assumed that he had simply forged those seals. Julius explained that even he would find it difficult to do such a thing. She reminded him of yesterday, when he had said that he was going to marry her, and she had not thought that he had chosen her to be his bride. The guy smiled and reminded her that she herself had said that anyone would do. The main thing was to keep the emperor happy, and he would duly get married soon enough. He said his memory was fine, and if he wasn't mistaken, it was just the way it was. In his opinion, there should be no claims now. In response, the aide asked for distance and admitted that indeed, those were her words. Julius smiled and let her know that it wasn't his fault. He did what she wanted and got her father's approval. All that was left was to get married and pretend to be a happy married couple. At that moment, she wished she could turn back the clock and make sure she never said those words. She wished she had thought of the consequences, and now she would have to keep her word. It's the most desperate situation imaginable. Now she wants to cry and run so far away that no one can find her. It's not clear why she started pulling out her sword, but the guy was quick to react and let her know so she wouldn't make a mistake she'd regret. He knows exactly what she's doing this for, so he tried to carefully avoid trouble. To make everyone happy and she would stop hating him, the prince asked her to wait a few minutes and listen to what he was about to tell her. Like suddenly, the guy suddenly offers to play some game, It's his last chance to stay in a good relationship and keep everyone happy. Arya became very curious as to what he meant, because most likely he wanted everyone to benefit and no one to be left offended. Julius revealed that his father is just thrilled with the news, now fully focused on preparing for the ceremony, which will take place 6 months from now. It didn't make things any better, but I think she better listen to the end. There's nowhere to go anyway. After that, he proceeded to the most interesting part and asked in advance not to be nervous. The girl tried to refrain and found all without strength to listen to the end of the guy suggested that if she ever defeats him in a duel in those 6 months, he'll work something out and not force her to marry him. But if she doesn't win, he'll be obligated to do so. Seems like a very favorable proposition because there is plenty of time. And if she doesn't want to stop being his wife so badly, you can try to win. And after that, honestly and fairly give up being husband and wife. Julius asked how she liked the idea. He thought it was fair. They have almost the same skills, so everything is as fair as possible. But the girl has always underestimated herself and thought that even ordinary knights can be better than her, although she is a commander herself and has proved more than once that she is one of the best. In her opinion, His Majesty superhuman, he is superior in everything. And there is no point in even trying to beat him in something. He is not only part of the royal family, but also a brilliant professional of his work. The Holy Sword chose the prince when he was only 5 years old. In theory classes, he also proved himself. Other people his age never understood how he managed to master almost all the skills he was interested in. There's not a single lesson in which he does not feel confident. The guy can read the textbook once, and after that, it is easy for him to pass the exam with a perfect score. He memorizes everything the first time. Even in the field of art, he has no equal. So it's no wonder Arya considers him a strong competitor and doubts himself. The girl thought that maybe she shouldn't even try and could think of another way to avoid getting married. Because if she lost, she could never give up or think of anything else to do. Seeing that she was starting to get nervous and hesitant, the prince smiled and asked if it was just him or if she didn't believe in her powers. He started reminding her what her position was and hinted that if she was having doubts, maybe someone else deserved her position. Of course, after this, she has no right to refuse because it shows her weakness and that there really should be someone else in her place. The girl offered to go outside to get right down to business and see who was stronger. She didn't want to wait long. Besides, there was no other choice now. It's no surprise that such an event has gathered everyone who cares to look at it. The knights have come, and even those she has offended have come. It's weird, but so far the girl hasn't even apologized to them anyway. That's not what this is about. She's got so much anger and resentment built up, maybe it'll do her some good in the competition. It looks like this is the most important, memorable, and responsible fight of her life, because it will determine whether or not they get married. At one point, Arya saw the familiar onlookers and got even more angry. She's not comfortable fighting while someone is looking on. To get them to leave, the girl hinted that this wasn't an entertainment show. Plus, she didn't understand why they left their posts and thought they could leave the workplace without permission. But she didn't leave alone. It's their day off, and instead of them, there are other knights on shift today. So in their free time, they have the right to do whatever they want. In the end, the girl resigned herself to letting them stay. For today, she had no right to forbid or tell them anything. Meanwhile, she decided that no one could dishonor her honor, especially so easily. If she left now or changed her mind, she could be considered unworthy of her title, Best Swordsman. Julius started to attack first and reminded of the conditions. The girl asked to start without further ado and pretended she didn't want to waste time on idle talk. They looked into each other's eyes as if they were about to have a fierce duel in which only one would be victorious. Each started with his best and most effective blows, because as you know, to win, it is better to exhaust the opponent in the beginning, so that he quickly tired and could not fight for a long time. Arya didn't expect it, but from the first seconds her opponent started to leave her no chance, he showed himself a true professional at some point. She wanted to cancel the fight. The guy jumped so high that the girl didn't even have time to react and notice when it happened. She didn't even see where he was or from which side to expect a hit. The onlookers started yelling and warning the commander to look around and not get distracted. At one point, the prince overreacted and did a little damage to the mansion. He destroyed a small building, and to prevent the huge planks from falling on Arya, he reacted quickly and walked over to her and tried to cover her with himself. The girl was frightened by the loud noise, for she did not immediately realize what it was. She expected to feel a blow, but in the end, she heard the frightening fall of large objects. On the one hand, it was very spectacular, but on the other hand, there's a little problem. He's going to have to renew the building and make it like it was. There was an awkward pause. Arya started to look at the prince, and he regretted overdoing it and ruining the duel. He had imagined it so much better, but in the end, it hadn't gone according to plan. He was not even afraid and admitted that it turns out he lost. Only the girl did not understand why he took it and what was the indicator of his loss. In response, she disagreed and said she lost. It sounded just as strange as him losing it. As soon as they started to find out who was right and who was wrong, there was a very loud shout, and judging by the voice, it was immediately clear that it was the Emperor. He was informed that he had destroyed a small building, and of course he couldn't ignore it. The Emperor went out into the street and started to get indignant. Julius replied, as usual, that it was not his fault that it was so easy, and in his opinion, it was to be blamed on those who built the building. How suddenly, to avoid conflict, he suddenly suggested to the assistant to run right away. She had no time to answer anything, as he was making her by the arm and stopped in a calmer place. The girl wasn't used to running so fast and far, and had to recover and catch her breath before she could say anything. Instead of calming her down and saying that he will take all the blame, the prince said that this time she is a full-fledged participant in the crime. The girl does not understand how to say it gently, that because of him, she's always getting into trouble, and he is always funny. The only excuse he could come up with was that it was a lot of fun and something to remember in the future. After a while, she doesn't have any more energy left. As usual, he just doesn't understand her and thinks it's no big deal. For the first time, he didn't go about his business. The guy stayed and even approached, but really, Julius wants to apologize. He pointed his finger at his cheek, and when the girl asked what that meant, the guy asked how she didn't understand basic hints. He admitted that he wanted her to kiss him as if he loved him very much. When suddenly, her patience finally running out, Arya began to resent how he was even letting himself think about it. The prince explained that, corrected, the loser fulfills the wish. The girl said that they did not agree on this, to which the guy replied that she did not ask anything. A very interesting situation. Although for her, it looks like the most real deception. She has no idea how you can do that to a person who has ruined the mood and yet insists as if she owes him something. Meanwhile, the manipulation began. Julius turned around and said that the famous commander doesn't want to take responsibility for her own loss. At that moment, she could think of nothing worse than punishment. He'd created an awkward situation on purpose, but it was strange that he'd thought of kissing her to punish her. Suddenly, the girl agrees, but on one condition, that no one else finds out about it, and he will never remember the situation. She said she would do it and tried to convince herself that it was nothing complicated, just a kiss on the cheek. The guy didn't believe till the last that she would actually do it. Arya closed her eyes and started to move closer. At that, she can't believe that she's about to kiss the prince now. And the interesting and surprising thing about it is that he asked her to do it, and it's his wish. It's weird that instead of coming up with a really difficult punishment, like eat something disgusting or do a difficult job, he came up with this one. She's so uncomfortable right now that she feels like she's never felt this way in her life. She has so many thoughts and questions right now, but at the same time, few answers. It is incomprehensible to her how the gentleman can even think about it. It seems that he is simply hiding his sincere feelings and thus trying to get closer, at least a little bit. The main thing is that it's not some kind of trap or another joke, but luckily he's not laughing right now and everything seems quite calm. As suddenly Julius turned his head a little to the right and made the assistant kiss not her cheek, but something else. Arya sensed something was wrong and immediately realized what it was. She looked at him with surprised eyes and began to wait for an explanation. In response, the guy said nothing and even smiled a little. The girl became unpleasant. she did not hold back and slightly hit him. Although in fact the blow was not weak, the guy did not expect such a reaction and even apologized. He realized that it was wrong and promised that he would never do it again. It was really unnecessary, and besides, the assistant had a right to react that way. They had originally agreed on something else. Arya was scared at first, after all. She had just hit her master, who could punish her for such a thing. But after that, she realized, sooner or later, she had to do it. She was tired of forgiving and ignoring such insolence. She doesn't understand what he's trying to accomplish, because even for a bad joke, it's too much. It's just a working relationship between them. And he's like a gentleman. He's letting himself go too far. At some point, a realization came to her. Arya was both embarrassed and asked that he just not say he liked her, and all these years he'd been trying to hint about it. At first, the prince was very surprised, and then, on the contrary, rejoiced. He was tired of being constantly hinted at and joked about on this subject, and at last a miracle happened. So that each understood the other well, he came closer and confessed that he had long admired her. For if she had been a mere assistant to him, she would have been punished or dismissed long ago for daring to strike him. He asked if it seemed strange to her when he forgave her constant tardiness at work and more, or, for example, that he suspiciously often allowed her to go on vacation. Arya wakes up the next day, and from the first second, starts remembering everything she heard. It's like she's been thinking about it all night long. She can't believe that all this time, she didn't notice the elementary hints, because really, she doesn't work hard at all. And unlike her colleagues, she has some days off and bonuses every month for no reason. It was as if she had an epiphany and saw what had been a mystery to her for many years. To cheer up and wake up a little, the girl went outside, went to the well and drew water. The worst thing about this situation is that she doesn't even know whether to be happy about it or not. She never perceived Mr. as someone to fall in love with. She never had it in her head that she dreamed of being his wife, as many auxiliaries in other states have. Perhaps that is what interested him. As long as he finds something amusing, nothing else interests him. That's the great demon king. Fighting it is like swimming against the tide. No matter how hard she tries to stop thinking about it, she can't get away with it, and sooner or later she's gonna have to have a serious talk about it. She doesn't really have an aversion to the man. He's a good-looking guy. And of course, it would be strange to refuse to become a princess and become his wife. It's all about whether she likes him or not. Arya is trying to figure it out, but so far she doesn't have a clear answer. Even cold water doesn't help her. It's one of the hardest days of her life. All she needs is for the prince to find her again and start making jokes about it. When suddenly, one of the knights comes in. The girl heard his voice, and at that moment, decided to pour another bucket of cold water on herself. She doesn't know how to calm down, which is strange, because if it were her, any other girl would be the happiest in the world, because it turns out she didn't have to do anything. The prince fell in love with her. And of course, as soon as she remembered him, not a few minutes later he appeared in the yard and pretended that nothing had happened. He was walking and smiling as usual, enjoying the beautiful sunny weather. Arya began to envy his calmness, because for her, all that happened yesterday, compared to the end of the world. Just a short time ago, he was ready to marry the first girl he met. And now, confessing his love, it turns out that she is not the first girl she met at all. As soon as he had an excuse to make her his wife under the guise of the first woman he met, he immediately seized the opportunity. Ostensibly, it had nothing to do with artificial feelings. When suddenly a huge animal ran past him, Julius barely saw something red and realized it was his father. He heard a scream and still continued to stand in the same spot. The emperor started to ask for help, but his son was interested in something else. He didn't even pay attention to it and thought his father would manage without him. There is nothing surprising in this, and as usual, instead of a native son, Arya comes to the rescue. She did not wait a second and went to catch up with the tigers. The girl jumped high and asked the prince to step aside. Julius heard her, and of course he didn't move a millimeter away. He thought it was the perfect opportunity to speak and decided to stop his lover. He ignored the fact that at any second, the emperor could be badly hurt. It was more important for him to clear things up and talk things through now. The guy grabbed her hand and warned her that until she confessed her feelings back, he wasn't going anywhere. He's willing to wait as long as it takes to hear that all this time, she's also been afraid to admit her love and make the first move. He catches her, and for some reason sure that's what he's about to hear. Julius starts calling her his fiancée and enjoys the moment. Except that the girl has other things on her mind right now. It's more important to save the Emperor than to talk about feelings that aren't there and never were. She ordered him to let her go at once, or else he would regret very much that he had begun to call her fiancé. She's really pissed off by that word, especially with his trademark smile. Arya doesn't know how to explain that he's always bad timing anymore. To make it clearer to him what was happening now and the danger his father was in, the girl explained that if he didn't let her go now, he could say goodbye to his father. The thing is that recently a tiger that was a gift from a neighboring state escaped. He captured His Majesty and is running around the castle with him. She must catch this tiger as soon as possible, or she'll never forgive herself or him if anything happens to the cameraman. Julius listened to her, and a miracle seemed to happen. He realized that the situation was very dangerous, and if nothing was done now, there would be problems. Arya got excited and thought he was about to run to save his father, but instead, he turned the situation into a game again and offered another idea. He wants to have another competition, in any other situation. She would have hit him again or left, but now the girl agrees to play the game. Because this way, he will at least help to save the Emperor. Except that if the man knew what his son was thinking, he'd have taken the title of prince from him long ago. It's hard to believe that he really has no pity, because this is his own father, who could die at any second. In the end, the girl agrees to the terms. Whoever first catches the tiger, the one who wins. She immediately ran to save the man and did not notice how the prince again did not move from the place. It looked like another joke, but now he definitely couldn't stop her. She started calling for the tiger and doing everything she could to get him to stop. When suddenly, a part of the Emperor's clothes, by which the Emperor was held by the animal, is torn and the Emperor falls to the floor. The tiger runs away without noticing anything. Arya struggles to catch up and make sure the Emperor doesn't hit the floor. She starts to get very nervous as she realizes that she's the only one who wants to help him. She starts asking a lot of questions to see if she's all right, because after something like that, any other person would have passed out a long time ago. No wonder the prince didn't even stop. He continued to play the game and is only interested in catching the tiger first. Meanwhile, the animal stopped. They started walking in a circle with it, and it seems that now it's certain that one will win for sure. The tiger starts to get really angry and does everything to scare the guy. Julius keeps smiling and does it on purpose. He gradually comes closer and closer, and it seems that at some point, he will very abruptly destroy or just catch the opponent. The animal starts growling with all his might, showing his fangs, but instead of getting down to business, the prince looks very calm, as if he's not going to defend himself. He has a completely kind look, which is very strange for such a situation. The guy didn't even pull out his sword and started to come even closer, when suddenly, he touched him and started apologizing, and also saying that it was all these people's fault. Even the tiger was surprised. The guy starts praising him. Supposedly such a noble beast could do no wrong. Eventually the two of them start smiling and become quite good friends. Arya realizes that she has lost again, and is afraid to imagine what he will ask her to perform this time. She approached them to let them know that the operator was fine as usual. The prince misunderstood everything and thought that's not why she approached at all. He suddenly started stroking her head. The girl was startled at first and then quickly removed his hand. She moved farther away and asked what he was doing. The girl didn't say a word, and he suddenly started touching her again. Arya was indignant and reminded that for now, at least she wasn't his wife, and he should have at least some respect for a common assistant. She asked to keep her distance and not come closer than a few meters away. Julius explained that he thought she wanted to be petted on the head too. Strange thoughts he had. The assistant explained that he had misunderstood her. After that, she didn't want to stay here. She said goodbye and said she had a lot of work to do today. She has a service and knights waiting for her, who probably take the opportunity and do nothing. It is her duty to oversee everything and get to work. The prince confessed that he had expected to hear nothing else. as suddenly, immediately afterward, he again disobeyed her and did what he very much wanted to do. Julius caught up with the bride, and without warning, tenderly embraced her, as if she were a sweetheart he hadn't seen in a long time. He reminded her that she seemed to have forgotten something and left, and that's not the way to do it. The girl didn't resist, because she realizes that he will find her and catch up with her anyway. The guy came to remind her of the competition, or rather, he came to remind her of the competition she has to fulfill, if she's responsible for her words, of course. In the end, she managed to escape, and after that, she wanted to be alone even more. The guy keeps following her around and doesn't even give her time to think it over and realize whether she needs it or not. She began to fear everything, any passers-by who suddenly appear, his voice in any situation where he starts smiling. The moment he spoke of a wish, Arya didn't stay silent and immediately asked what he wanted. The prince smiled even more, and by doing so, began to scare her. He looked at her as if this time, his desire would be much more interesting than the past. Arya tensed up, for she was ready to hear anything. She realizes that the last kiss, it would only be flowers compared to what he could ask for now. At one point, the girl noticed that he enjoyed seeing her scared reaction. It was like he was purposely silent and watching her get scared. The girl didn't stand for it. She slapped him and told him it wasn't funny. If he wanted to laugh again, he'd better find someone else. She had enough to do, and when he did come up with an assignment, he could come over. After briefly thinking, Julius hinted that the assignment would be tonight. He admitted that he couldn't wait for that moment. And also, she would only know all the details when she came to dinner. He's done a good job of intriguing the girl, but it makes her even more scared, because now she knows your feelings, and is sure that the assignment will be connected to it. She's very curious about what's going to happen tonight, also in the form of an assignment. She's already expecting trouble and an awkward situation. Meanwhile, she opens the door to her room, and just moments later, she hears familiar voices. Arya walks in and sees the maids actively trying to take out all of her things, including her personal belongings. They take even books and her clothes, although usually they are forbidden to touch someone's personal belongings, because the cleaning includes only dusting and changing the bed linen. This doesn't look like a normal cleaning, but so far the commander is trying not to make it seem weird. She even thought she might have made a mistake and mixed up the room. The girl went out to make sure, but she saw her name. It means things are very strange. Arya doesn't remember asking anyone to clean her room. She likes to do it herself and has no idea what it is or who let them into her room. After a while, she notices that there are more and more maids. They are clearly trying to get the job done as quickly as possible, as if it were some special assignment. Everyone quickly runs around and tries to take everything they can see with them, literally within minutes. There is almost nothing left in the room. There's a suspicion that perhaps this strange cleaning is related to the prince's desire, but so far, it's not entirely clear what that might have to do with it. It's very strange that they didn't warn her about anything and took away all her things. The girl stood in the middle of an empty room for a few minutes, because she doesn't understand who to complain to and how to explain it. Meanwhile, everyone has long loved this tiger and even decided to shelter him in the mansion. And that's not all. Even the emperor considers him a cute kitten, although recently thought otherwise. He began to admire him, and it lasted for several hours. The man decided to forget that situation, explaining that everything went without trouble. He did not want to chase him away, much less punish him. On the contrary, he gave him toys and asked him to create a small house, at which point Arya comes up to him and asks if anyone has seen the prince. She has something to discuss with him. The knight was surprised and remembered that the commander wanted to go to her room and rest there for a few hours. But since she came back, he wondered what happened. He even joked that he couldn't even rest for a few minutes. The girl said that such and such had happened, and if he was really interested, she would tell him about it a little later on. The prince appears just a second later. Arya turns towards him, and of course feels very awkward again, especially in the presence of the emperor, because there's no telling what you can expect from this joker. She gets really angry and asks him to behave better in front of the emperor this time. The guy is wearing his best clothes, holding a red rose with his teeth and asking for the girl to come closer. It looks a bit dubious. If it weren't for the emperor, She would have turned around and started running away by now. But, not to ruin her reputation and upset the man, to stay and endure until the end. Arya moved closer and asked what was going on. She had so many questions, and it seemed like he wasn't going to answer them anytime soon. Julius had said that this evening a ghostly villain was sure to steal her heart. Apparently it looked a little better in his mind than it actually turned out to be. Absolutely everything he's saying now is starting to resent him more and more. She doesn't like that he's taking advantage of the Emperor's presence and acting like they're really in love. She wondered what the prince was up to, for if this was another joke, she had no desire to stay here and watch his strange behavior. The prince for the first time could not stand it. After all he had just tried, and she did not appreciate even a fancy suit, he turned around and began to leave. He began to accuse her of never appreciating his attention because things were supposed to happen very differently. After that, he asked her not to say anything and to follow him silently. The guy led her to some room, and as soon as he opened the door, Arya was speechless. She's seen incredible beauty, but at the same time, she doesn't forget that it could still be a trap. Then, they went into a beautiful room that looks like a princess's room. Everything here is in shades of pink. Incredibly beautiful marble floor, and furniture that looks like a work of art. It's very spacious and beautiful here. I didn't even want to leave. Arya is ready to tolerate any situation, just to stay here longer and admire this beautiful atmosphere. After a while, she did wonder what he'd brought her here for, and whose room it was. Julius explained that from now on, his beloved would live here, not in the knight's dormitory, and that this was the punishment she had no right to refuse. And that's not all. The food will be delivered to her room. She doesn't even have to go out and cook. She can entrust all the daily chores to the maids. And also, all the things are already organized in this room. Everything is ready for comfortable living, and that's all he wanted to say. After that, the prince went about his business and left her alone with the maids. She didn't even have time to ask anything, if only because of that. No more questions. Before, she could only dream of such fine conditions. Besides, her last room had been 10 times smaller than this one. The impression is that this is not a room, but some huge living room where many guests are about to arrive. It was immediately obvious to her that this was another of the prince's plans to get her to stop being angry with him and see him as a man trying to make things right. He was obviously thinking about something, since he'd probably been preparing her new room and new staff instead of working all this time. She wanted to savor this opportunity to experience what it would be like to be a princess. After the evening's routine, the girl sent to a soft and warm bed, and at some point noticed that she was no longer as angry as before at all. She smiles all evening and does not cease to be happy about surprises from the prince. Can it mean that sooner or later, she will start to fall in love with him and will see in him not only a joker, but also a future husband? She noticed that he hadn't messed with her all night, and also had the helpers do all of her laundry. Arya doesn't understand when he had time for all of this. Just as she started to close her eyes, she happened to hear someone walking down the hallway somewhere nearby. But initially, she thought it was just her imagination. Then, these footsteps began to approach her room, and she began to hear them very clearly. And at first she was a little frightened. At that moment, the door opens, and some guy walks into the room. He hasn't said a word, like he's walking into his room. I wonder who it could be, since the girl wasn't expecting or inviting anyone late at night. As suddenly, very strangely, but Arya was fast asleep. She didn't even notice how it happened, for in her room unknown to her, the guy starts to come closer and realizes that the girl is asleep. But who it is and what he needs at such a time, she will never find out. It turns out to be Julius. He deliberately waited until she had no more energy, and the girl wanted to sleep very badly. At first, he just stared at her in silence, and then he started smiling. I just hope he doesn't have any bad intentions. As suddenly, he uttered a phrase that could be followed by anything. The prince whispered and asked if Arya was sure she could trust him like that. He touched her cheek and began to dim the light, very curious as to what he had come for and what those strange words meant.